So, Bob, affordable housing, it's the hot issue in town now.
It's only been the hot issue for years.
Yeah, but now it seems like people are starting to really get aware of the fact that this is happening, because we're now in the final strokes of this court-imposed zoning that we're having to do.
I think this in the next week or so we settle with the court, which means they accept the affordable housing plan that meets their objectives of 1,000 affordable units and the associated market rate units to support the 1,000.
Yeah, so there's all this arcane geometry or algebra rather of how you calculate the 1,000 credits, because if you put in
Rental
really low
units.
income or rental or senior, you get some double credits and things like that. So you have to get your score up to 1,000. So I think in the aggregate we're end up around just under 1,800 units total.
Yeah, there's 1,873 units, and through maximizing those, I'll call it 2-for-1 credits. So we maximize the rental credits. Senior housing also gave us additional credits, and we attempted to maximize that as much as we could. So that allowed us a lower multiplier. So at the end, what were we? Well, at least what was in my mind's eye, and I think it was in your mind's eye too. How do we minimize the impact to the town?
Yeah, all these terms like multipliers and things like that. My sense when I talk to people, like we just had the country fair, and I was talking to a lot of people, and as soon as I started using what I'll call the inside baseball terms,
Sure.
I've been doing this for 20 years, so you can fall into that trap easily. They're like, I don't know what it means, and then they get frustrated. They think that the fix is in and all that, and when I tell them, I said, look, the fix is in. But it's not us doing the fixing. We're the last line of defense here before it actually happens, and we're trying to do the best job we can to minimize that impact. Like I said, I've been on here for a long time in the governing body, and we kept the population basically flat for 20 years. I don't think we're going to be able to maintain that given the building situation we're going to have to go do.
For sure.
And one of the interesting things that's come through this process, when the legislature and the Governor Christie, kind of walked away from affordable housing, the court stepped in. And through this Mount Laurel judicial fiat process, they basically are imposing affordable housing a constitutional right. You can argue about whether that makes sense or not, but that ship has sailed. And there's no one to go talk to and complain about this. You can complain to your friends and family, but they're not going to be able to do anything.
The only one really to complain to is the legislature, because they just have been absent since 2005 and not attempting to fix this at all.
They don't want to fix it.
Well, it's a sticky issue, because on one hand, how would you be against affordable housing? It's like being against motherhood. Folks need to live. People are starting out of college. Beginning police officers, beginning teachers need appropriate places to live, and I think we can all agree to that. But sort of as you grow. In other words, this court mandate that you need 1,000 units, we've gone back and forth to try to figure out how they calculated the 1,000.
It's
tried
nuts.
to find our own consultant.
It's like Soviet-style central planning.
Yeah, the wheat will be better in 5 years.
It's terrible, because I will take objection to the whole point that the market won't resolve this issue, because I believe that, and I think there's a legitimacy for the state government to step into municipalities who are using zoning to block the market from satisfying an affordable housing need. So I think there is some legitimate pushback on the municipalities to not create exclusive zoning.
Right.
But to then take it not one step further, but completely flip it on its head and say, not only that, regardless of whether there's a market demand or not, you have to allow for this building, because the builders are coming in here. They don't want to build affordable housing. They're just doing it as a tax.
Right.
So they're going to put in 300 or 400 units and take a 25% set aside for affordable housing into medium and low income. And that's just the tax that for that development, right? And if they go vacant, then that's just a tax that's sitting there. Right. It's not good for anybody.
That's just
and we've had
of doing
affordable housing in town from the prior rounds,
mm-hmm.
and it hasn't been used. Now, sometimes we've been tapped out, but a lot of times we've had inventory
for a year.
Yeah.
for a year or longer that just sat there and waiting for someone to rent it or buy it, et cetera, and it just sat there.
So the bureaucrats have really run amok here because you have all these lawyers and lobbyists and the builders, they're the ones who get the attention. The 565 municipalities who are dealing with this do not. And, you can lobby as a group, but that's not the group doesn't have a common interest because different towns have different objectives. But we're on the short end of the stick. There's nobody to really complain to. And they've taken this issue and says every town has to solve it under fair share, which means they're taking it like peanut butter and spreading it across the state as if people want to equally live across the state without looking at this regionally or looking at where the demand is.
Or where the jobs are.
Where the jobs
Or
are, where the mass
transportation.
transit.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. And my premise all along has been, even though we're going to get stuck with all these units, they're not going to get built. The first couple of projects will get built, but I believe that there's going to be I've used the term slow roll and gotten in trouble with the courts for saying that. I'm just saying the market reality is it's going to slow roll because developers aren't going to lay out the money to build stuff and then it go vacant. We've already had developers build stuff out of market and gone bankrupt. Their projects gone bankrupt a couple of times, and they've come back to us and said, lift the 55 and over restriction. And they lobby Trenton for a law that forces us basically to do that. And we did that, and they still had trouble selling it. So, there's units going up on 22.
Yeah,
22 right now.
I get a lot of people stopping me about that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
It's a disgrace because maybe we should just talk about that so we can answer a question that someone will ask us sooner or later.
We know what the questions are. That is, so Advance Realty, which is a big real estate developer, was pushing that for years. And we got, a 25% set aside for that?
Just about, yeah. I think there were, 28 affordable housing units in it.
And then they sold it to Lennar developers.
So they came to us for approval,
right,
through the Board of Adjustment, and all sorts of issues get handled there. So how the properties are spaced, what kind of community space is in there, where the affordables will be, et cetera, et cetera. And one of our stipulations was, which is a reasonable stipulation for, I think it's 3 or 4 stories tall, is to have an elevator. Okay, they agreed. Done. Go forth, advance, and build this. Well, they flip it to Lennar. Well, now Lennar doesn't want to build an elevator, apparently. And you sit there and go, well, wait a minute. You talked about the demographics earlier of the town. You're right. The population is staying pretty much flat, but the kids are going. Right, the school population has dropped in the same period of time.
So the population is flat, but it's getting older. So
it's getting
less
older.
Kids.
So as you and I age,
right,
the appeal for an elevator grows.
Right.
So in my 20s, 3 flights of stairs, not a problem. With groceries, not a problem. Carry a kid on your hip, not a problem. Now it's a problem. They should build the elevator. And that's why you see, just for the folks at home, that's why you see it frozen.
Yeah. So I think the Board of Adjustment meets tomorrow night. So today is September 30th. We're recording this. The Board of Adjustment can't act on this. They have to keep it the way it is. If the courts if Lennar wants to sue, let them sue, because what I don't want is for our Board of Adjustment to approve any changes to what was agreed to in our affordable housing settlement, because I could see a scenario where the elevators get waived, and I can listen to all the lawyers' arguments. I don't really care what they say. I'm saying that if we're under a court mandate right now, and regardless of what we say yes or no or sideways, we then own it. If what I'm saying is punt it to the courts. Let the courts decide, because I don't want the courts to come back and say you build a third floor walk-up, which is not really affordable housing, therefore we're disallowing it.
Right, it'll come back and bite us for sure.
It'll come back and bite us if we waive it.
That or even just the residents years later, right?
Yeah. I mean, who's going to walk up 3 flights of stairs? I mean, it's one thing to have a three stories in your house, and you can do that, but it's another thing to have your entire flat in the 3rd floor, and it's a walk up. some people might want it, but I don't think we should build it today, especially as you think of ADA and issues like that in terms of accessibility. I just don't think we should do it. So, but the affordable housing issue, back to this whole process, people get very upset about, this happening. And by the way, they should be upset.
Well, we're upset. We're just a little more numb after dealing with it for the last, at least for me, for the last 6 years. But you've been dealing with it for nearly 20.
You can't imagine, Bob. It's and I'm not exaggerating. This sounds like hyperbole. It is literally on the agenda every 2 weeks for years. And I'm thinking I haven't seen it not on the agenda for 20 years. We've been talking about this.
And we're blessed, that's sarcasm, because we have the most interveners. So that always means there's churn in the court. Someone's trying to stand up and say, no.
And so what that means is when the Supreme Court came down and said, you must
Supreme
go do
Court,
this,
yeah.
All these builders came in and basically it's kind of like a lawsuit. They file a suit of interest, essentially, which classifies them as an intervener in our plan, which means we want to build in Branchburg. We had 14 developers basically sue Branchburg in this process. No other town in the state had as many. We had 14. So now we're looking at, it's hard for us to make an argument that nobody wants to build here. And most of these developers were in like industrial zones and zones that weren't really set up for housing. So now we're looking at 14 and the court's just saying, okay, we're not backing off the 1,000 credits that you need for affordable housing. And now, so what we tried to do, what I thought was a creative solution that actually bought us some time with the courts so we could facilitate this where we're at today, is we ran a couple RFPs. We said, we're not going to do them all, but we're going to have to do some because the court's not going to let us do nothing. Or they're going to let them, if we said nothing and just said, folded our arms and walked away, the court would have turned all 14 loose in the courts, and it would be a building frenzy. First to build sells their units. That would have been terrible because then all that development would show up on right away.
You'd probably be facing my estimate.
I'd have moved
double.
Before it happened. So
double, yeah.
You would have sent me a postcard on how it was. That would have been a terrible outcome. So we ran an RFP to say, let's figure out which developments we can get the best deal on.
Mm-hmm. And,
right?
And best being defined as least impact to the town.
For the most part. I think that's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
fewer units are good overall.
Yeah, when people looked at the outcome, they'd say, hey, this feels like it's heavy on the north side of the town. And the reality is that's where all the interveners were.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a high concentration of interveners in the north. So it's not like we could say, hey, our main goal is to spread it around. Our main goal was not to do too much development in the aggregate because we don't want to change the character of any area of the town. We're managing the macro financials of the town, the tax base, et cetera.
Right, and that's a little bit of a hard part for the public to sort of come to grips with, in that, well, why don't you put it on that vacant land or that vacant land or that vacant land? Well, no. You had to submit a viable proposal, because the judge would not sign off if we said, we're going to just change the zoning here, wherever here is, and it's now going to be, you could put as many houses as you want on there.
But we did that for some stuff, like the Triangle property down in the south. We acquired that property and we facilitated that.
Well, we facilitated that in general, but I mean just a pure zoning play.
Yeah.
So folks need to understand that those 17 properties, those were the cards we had to play, because it had to be a viable, producible piece of property that would get you towards your 1,000 quota. So that was one piece. The other piece, earlier you talked about, sort of like, it's sort of becoming a little more heartfelt than brain felt for a lot of the residents, and a lot of them feel like this is our thing, right? This is a Branchburg thing. And I when I get stopped, I said, just do me a favor, pick the neighboring towns, pick any town in New Jersey, pretty much except the big city, and just Google town name, affordable housing. Put in Reddington, they're facing it. Warren, they're facing it. Bridgewater, Hillsborough, Bedminster, they're all facing it. So, it's not a Branchburg only thing. In fact, the 1,000 units that we have is out of a pie for the whole state of 150,000 affordable units. And that's just the affordable units. Those 150,000 then have their market multipliers. So you could imagine 600,000 to 750,000 units in the Garden State.
Which so you start talking all these numbers, and at some level, people's
Eyes roll back in
glaze
their head,
over.
right.
But if you think of 750,000 new homes being built in the state through this whole thing, and we got 1,800 of those houses, right?
And in the next 5 years, they have to build these things.
Yeah,
in theory,
not going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is because New Jersey has a net outflow.
right.
So unless people start, two people in a house, hey, let's each get our own house, it isn't going to happen. So I don't know where all these people are coming from. And what's going to happen, and this is why I think, goes back to my comment about slow roll. As soon as the builders, so a lot of these builders, they want their plans approved, and then they're going to sit on them. They're going to wait and see how the market goes.
Sure.
They may not have their capital lined up. They may want to wait and see what goes on, but they want to be locked in because they can be locked in for years. So we had a development in the north side of town off of Burnt Mill Road. 50 houses went up there.
The Toll Brothers property?
I don't know who built it.
Okay.
Was it Toll Brothers?
I think so.
50. If it was 50 units. But that lawsuit started in 98. And it's still not sold out. It's 21 years later. So we have the ability to work this system. And right now, we're getting an